Good morning, everyone. I am Ma'am Heidi Gatdula, and I am the first one who will report about the first language acquisition. We all know that language is a very important part of our life. Communication between individuals not only enable us to comprehend not, or understand each other, but it helps us in developing relationships and allows us to convey our thoughts, our ideas, plans, and etc. We all know that language plays a vital role in our everyday lives. But the question is, how did we able to learn how to speak? How did we know when to say it or what to say? Language acquisition is something that can be misunderstood, simplified, or even forgotten. Yet, using the language and acquiring the language is an amazing ability that we have as humans. So, this morning, we are going to discuss the different theories behind the first acquisition or first language acquisition. Now, language acquisition is a process which can take place at any period of one's life. It refers to the natural process whereby a child acquires its mother tongue. We all know that the world has different races. Then we all know that each one of us also have different mother tongue. So what are the different characteristics of first language acquisition? First, it is an instinct. It is true that our language or acquiring the language will trigger us by birth, wherein it takes its own course through the course of linguistic input from the environment we are in, especially when the environment of the child or the people that surround the child rather communicate to the child in adult form. Therefore, a child, as as observant as he or she is, it is an instinct for the child to learn the language. Next, it's very rapid. Rapid means the amount of time required to acquire one's native language in a quite short or very short time or period time in his or her life. Next, it is very complete. The quality of language acquisition is far better than acquiring the second language or language that can be learned after. One does not forget its native or his or her native or mother tongue or native language. Despite the age of the child, he or she can still remember his or her mother tongue. Next characteristic of first language acquisition is it does not require instructions. Despite the fact that many non-linguists think that mothers are important for children to learn their native language, instructions by parents or the people who took care of the child or take care of the child or caretakers are not that important, despite the psychological benefits of the attention given to the child. Meaning to say, some language or some acquisition of language is born naturally. Next characteristic of first language acquisition is it is predictable. Meaning to say, in a given situation or circumstance, a child knows what to react, what to say, and when to say it. Next, they learn through imitations. As they say, what the child sees, eventually the child follows. Meaning to say, whatever the child is seeing or whatever the child tries to observe, he or she imitates it. Um, Especially those who have babies back at home, try to observe when you say something or do something, your child eventually follow or imitate your words or your action. Next, they are very creative. Uh, as we observe or as per observation, when we try to talk to a toddler, eventually we cannot understand what they are saying. But on their part, they are trying to say something for us to understand, but in a different way. Meaning to say, since it is their formative years, the words are also forming for them to use. So, in that manner, eventually the child is very creative in using ways or words or language that for them is the correct one. Each child eventually has the ability to communicate according to the stage or different stages. Now, the infant or small babies eventually at the age of about um, 3 months to 5 months, they eventually develop organic sounds like crying or cooing, and it is also the stage wherein the beginning of bubbling phase. These small babies or infant try to communicate using sounds. Like if they're hungry, they cry. If they want to be soothed, they coo or cooing. Now, at the end of first year, each child eventually develop his or her first comprehensible words wherein they develop from one word to two words and then eventually form or use many words in a sentence. Now, for 18 months, or shall we say 2 years old, the inflection of communicating occurs wherein the child learns to negotiate, the child learns to ask questions, or the child eventually requests or do or say commands. Now, for 3 years old, he or she eventually has these thousands of vocabularies. Because of his or her experience or exposure in language acquisition, this child eventually can use thousands of different vocabularies through or using communication. Then, for school age, like 5 and above, the main syntactic rules have been acquired. They eventually know how to use words in a sentence and when to say it or when to use it. Now, what are the different theories of language acquisition? There are four main schools of thought which provide theoretical paradigms guiding the course of language acquisition. I will discuss two of these theories since my partner will discuss the remaining two. The four theories of language as stated is or are behaviorist theory or imitation, nativist theory, innateness or mentalism, and cognition. What is behavioral theory, or shall we say imitation? Behavioral theory was part of B.F. Skinner's theory, which is the language has been long thought of a process through imitation and reinforcement. Skinner's theory was based on the belief of how the behavior and actions could be controlled by their consequences. He also believed that the positive reinforcement was successful within children's education as it encouraged them to try their best and complete their work to their best potential. He also said that language is learned just like other things. Now, Skinner argued in his behavioral approach theory during 1957 to 1960 that language acquisition could be explained by the mechanism of operant conditioning. So what do you mean by operant conditioning? Operant conditioning, wherein the child goes through a trial and error, in other words, they try and fail to use the correct language until they succeeded. Then they need reinforcement to reshape that is provided by the parent's gesture. Like, for example, when the child says something and he or she eventually see the reactions of his or her parent, and when the parent or the mother or the father smile, it is a gesture of confirmation that the words uttered by the child is correct. That is one of the theory or the study of or theory given by Skinner. Now, it was argued by Chomsky during of the same year. Chomsky believed that the language acquisition is an innate structure or functions of the human brain. Noam Chomsky also, however, said or disagree with Skinner relating to children's learning and development, as Chomsky believes that humans are born with basic knowledge. Chomsky also believes that language is biologically inherited, whereas Skinner's theory is based on how the language learned by the child through how to talk, through the use of positive reinforcement from adults who already speak a language fluently. Therefore, Chomsky also goes against Skinner's belief of how the use of praise and reward with children. In fact, it does not help them. Chomsky's theory disagrees with Skinner's method of positive reinforcement, as Chomsky believes that the use of praise does not assist the child in developing or encouraging the child to learn how to acquire knowledge, because between Skinner and Chomsky, the two eventually had led to different thinking, where if we go with Skinner's theory that language acquisition is based on um, operant conditioning, wherein it requires the help or assistance of the parents for the child to learn how to acquire knowledge through their praise and rewards, eventually it is somehow true. While Chomsky believe that the language acquisition is inborn. It is within us. We learn it from the moment we try to speak or to utter words, even if the words are not yet formulated. Meaning to say, even the child is still struggling to convey a message and using, or the child is using different forms of communication, it is already a form or language or acquisition of language. Let's proceed to the next theory, which is the nativist theory. In this theory, it is an acquisition that is innately determined. Chomsky believed that children are biologically programmed for language acquisition. Eventually, Chomsky um, said or believed that there are inborn structures in our brain, that what he called the language acquisition device. He also said during or in this particular theory that human abilities and development are innate. It is a hardwired at birth. So meaning to say, as what I have mentioned a while ago, that the child eventually acquired language innately. It is born, inborn. Okay. So also Chomsky believes that using this particular device or the language acquisition device is that children need only a minimal language exposure to eventually let LAD or language acquisition device uh, functions. Meaning to say, when you are trying to help the child to speak, eventually there is something in his brain that will work and eventually help him to formulate language, or eventually what we call his response to your way of communication. This particular language acquisition device also helps explain the innate human ability to develop sophisticated language systems. It extends and clarifies the children's language or the children's way of learning the language ability and drive them to communicate. And that ends the first part of first language acquisition. Again, I am Heidi Gatula and thank you for listening.